take your seats, that would be lovely. And if you all just front, side, anywhere where you can get up easily, that's all. So yesterday, we had a session called our Faculty Spotlight, where you got to hear from 6 of our faculty members give a short talk about their work and then followed with a workshop. Today, what we're going to do is the seminary has a number of research centers and initiatives happening across the campus. There are more than we can highlight in this little bit of time we have. But we have 4 of our office or initiative or center staff who are going to be here and share a bit about the work that they are doing. I'm going to let them mostly introduce themselves when they stand up, but I'll do a quick run now, and they'll each give you a better taste of who they are and what they're doing. And then 3 of the 4 will offer a seminar downstairs in one of the classrooms, and they'll be marked on the door as well. All right? So with us this morning, we have Shari Oosting, just wave, Shari Oosting, Liz Moore, Soojin, Chung, and Johnna, Herrick-Phelps. I'm going to let them introduce themselves because I don't want to waste any more time. But they know the order in which they are speaking, so we're going to get started. Thank you.
When Dale says get started, I jump. Thank you so much for letting me be with you today. My name is Shari Oosting, and I am directing a new initiative here at the seminary called the Polaris Young Adult Leadership Network. Before this, I worked at the Institute for Youth Ministry and in continuing education more broadly before spending 4.5 years at Princeton Theological Seminary in Holland, Michigan, where I directed field education and did a lot of one-on-one vocational discernment with seminary students. So I'm really delighted to be back at the seminary for the past 1.5 years to help develop a network that not only serves young adults who imagine themselves going into ministry as a profession or as their full-time job or even bivocationally, but Christians who think that God has to do with whatever they're doing in the world, whether they're serving in the marketplace, whether they're starting a business, whether they are trying to get out of bed the next day, and that's their calling, to be healed or whole. So we're really excited to be thinking about Christian calling and vocation, particularly with young adults who are in their 20s. So thanks for having me. I'm a 2009 grad, so I've got some of my people here. So today I'm going to be talking about a very particular way that we're accompanying young adults right now. This is kind of hot off the press. We've been working to develop a resource called What's Next, and this is about Christian vocational discernment, which we think is applicable to any stage of life, but is especially poignant for folks who are in their 20s. The Polaris Young Adult Leadership Network is seeking to cultivate connections among young adults across the United States and to resource their leadership. To begin this work, we asked 12 organizations across the United States. These 12 organizations were working with congregations to help them be more faithful in ministry with young adults. Each organization nominated 2 young adults to join a year-long fellowship program. Of these 22 incredible young leaders that we've been privileged to journey with for about 7 months now, 9 of them have made major career shifts and or moved across the country. 1 of them had a child, 1 is expecting a child. 1 of them got engaged, and 1 of them just 2 weeks ago got fired from a job. This is so typical, right? If you think back to your 20s, I mean, the number of decisions, the number of changes that happen are significant, ongoing, overlapping. I don't know about you, during the pandemic, I was locked up with a lot of young kids, and the song of Anna in Frozen 2 is, "Do the next right thing," right? This is the question of Christian discernment. It's not just for young adults, right? It's just as poignant in retirement. It's just as poignant in middle age. If you attended here, you probably are familiar with the term coined by Anselm of Canterbury in the 11th century, which is that theology is faith-seeking understanding. I don't know about you, this is why I came to seminary. I was like, I have questions. And I think God has something to do with it. Now, of course, I thought that if I studied Greek and Hebrew, I would get the answer to all my questions. So in that way, seminary was like hugely disappointing. But I have also come to realize, this was popularized, of course, by Professor Daniel Migliore in his book by that same name, Thanks Be to God. In the introduction to Dr. Migliore's book, he says that the act of theology is daring. It's a courageous thing to be a human being and to try to understand God. Like, how audacious of us. I would argue that Christian discernment is an accompanist to theology. It's the question of, if we seek to understand God, what in the world do we do with that? That knowledge, that understanding, how do we grapple with that in the embodied experience of our own lives, in the particularity of our own stories? Like, this is the wildest adventure we could ever choose to undertake. There are different ways of understanding Christian vocation and calling, of course. One really helpful book on this is William Placker's book, Callings. I love this because he's gathered together firsthand accounts of calling from the first century through the Reformation era. So I won't try to summarize the book, but it's fascinating to see how calling has been understood differently at different points in history. So in the first century, to become a Christian, to accept that call, was likely to lose your relationship with your family, potentially to head to the Colosseum and face the possibility of death for accepting a call to follow Jesus. Over time, decades, centuries, possibly saying yes to God's call was to lead a life of asceticism, or to join a religious order, or to go serve at a church and a congregation. So these things have changed over time. It's important to understand, too, how the Reformation era made this a much more individualized thing, as Blair was talking about. Another really helpful interjection into our understanding of Christian calling and vocation. This book by Patrick Reyes was published in 2016, and I think it's a really helpful interjection into some of the really pretty stories of, like, I've been called, and it's beautiful, and Patrick shares his own story in what I would call a critical autoethnography of Christian vocation. And he said in his community, his Christian calling was to survive to adulthood. He grew up in a community that was plagued by gang violence. He shares a very poignant story, his personal story at the beginning of it. And he says, some of us are called to survive to adulthood before we can think about any of these pretty theological concepts of what it means to be called and leave behind, some sort of comfortable life. He says, some of us need to survive. And he lands in a really beautiful place talking about sequoia trees as a better analogy than the hero's journey. The sequoia tree is really huge. It has an incredibly shallow root system, which means that they depend on each other to stay standing. Lastly, I'll just mention Susan Maros also wrote a book called Calling in Context, which explores the different parts of our identity and how they shape and inform the way that we think about our call. This can be gendered, it can be socioeconomic, it can be vary by level of education, etc. When I think about Christian calling, and if you come downstairs into the workshop later, my basic assumption is that if you are a Christian, you are called in some way. When Jesus boils down the law, when he's being challenged by the scribes and Pharisees in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, probably all the synoptics, he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. This is probably the most simple commission we could ever receive and the most difficult thing we could ever attempt to live out. So I think being called by God is really simple, and it's really complicated. I think this question should resurface in our lives over and over and over again. So I argue that the work of Christian discernment, this work of faith-seeking wisdom, so if theology is faith-seeking understanding, I argue that discernment is faith-seeking wisdom. I argue that we need to slow down a little bit and pause to consider our stories. So I like to encourage folks to think about God, to think about the story of yourself, and to think about the stories of others that God has placed in your life. A really helpful resource for this is a very, very thin, simple book written by Catholic practical theologian Kathleen Cahalan, who serves at a seminary in Minnesota. In this book, The Stories We Live, she makes a really simple but profound argument that your Christian calling is not a noun. It is not a destination that you get to arrive at. It's not a thing that you get to possess. I'm a preacher. Well, great. Well, when your church fires you, are you no longer called by God because you don't get to preach? Or you say, I am a teacher, or I'm a mother, and then you lose a child. What happens to these identity crises that we have when we think that our calling is something that we can own or possess? Instead, Kathleen argues that our callings are prepositions. They're stories. It's about the movement of our lives and the way that we're called by God, right? A preposition is the part of a sentence that connects two things to each other. It puts them in relationship with each other. You've been called with others. You've been called toward things. You've been called toward acts of justice and mercy and kindness. You've been called away from things, right? So I think that Christian discernment is about deep exploration of our stories and the way that our stories interact with other people's stories. So we've just developed a 5-week resource. I think Johnna will probably mention this a little bit too when she presents. But we're trying to accompany people through the prepositions of their stories to find out how God is at work, what God is calling them to leave behind, what God is calling them to move toward. And we're trying to complexify this sense of being called by God as something you can possess, and instead as something that you can journey toward and through. We focus on just 4. These do not mirror Dr. Cahalan's book exactly, but we focus on being called by God as an immovable kind of preposition in your life, right? That doesn't change regardless of your job or trajectory or location. What are you called toward? We do some introspective work on the holy longings that God has placed in your life as being gifts, not necessarily things to overcome, but things to learn from and pay attention to. What you're called away from, and who you're called with. And I think of this as the cloud of witnesses, both historic and contemporary, that God has placed in your life that serve as instructors, teachers, and companions. Frederick Buechner's book, Telling Secrets, I think makes one of the most compelling cases for me about the importance of our stories. In this book, Buechner finally decides to share the story of his father's suicide. And for a long time, Buechner had considered that his mother's story to share. He didn't think he could write about it. My own father committed suicide when I was a baby, so admittedly, when I read this book, it kind of wrecked me a little bit. But he also makes the case for why our stories are important, both for us to understand and for us to share. So I'll read you just a tiny bit. This is just from the introduction to his book, Telling Secrets. Buechner says, telling our stories is the central paradox of our human condition. And what we hunger for, perhaps more than anything else, is to be known in our full humanness. And yet that's often just what we fear more than anything else. It's important to tell, at least from time to time, the secret of who we truly and fully are, even if we tell it only to ourselves. Otherwise, we run the risk of losing track of who we truly and fully are. And little by little, we come to accept instead the highly edited version which we put forth in hopes that the world will find it more acceptable than the real thing. So for Buechner, telling stories is part of how we understand who we are. It's like how we become more human. So should you choose to come to the workshop after this, one of the things we want you to do is have both an experience in exploring your own story. So we'll focus on 2 of the prepositions of Christian calling. One is what I call kind of a cloud of witnesses exercise, that we will give you an opportunity to think about who God has called you with and through, who has God placed in your cloud of witnesses. And then we'll also talk about how you've been called by God. How does this unshakable presence of God in your life give you certainty through all the other life transitions that may come your way? And then I've got some stuff about our leadership network. But I hope that this will be a benefit for you as you think about your call.
Good morning. Yes, get settled if you didn't get a chance to get a seat. So 2 weeks ago, the Institute for Youth Ministry held its 29th annual Forum on Youth Ministry. What is the Forum on Youth Ministry, you might ask? Well, my new friends, It is a gathering of Christian adults who are caring for the spiritual, emotional, and physical lives of young people in whatever their context. While the forum often translates to a lot of professional youth ministers working in a congregational setting, sometimes also unpaid volunteers, we often also have joining us here at the PTS campus people who are in other forms of leadership within their churches, such as clergy, some children's leaders in ministry. Sometimes we also have teachers, community leaders, essentially any Christian adult who is trying to think theologically about the care of young people in their midst. These are the folks who care very deeply about the faith lives of young people and are trying to form them with a certain theological understanding of who they are, who God is, and how the world is formed and what that might mean for them. Usually, the forum is structured in more of a sage on the stage model where participants hear from theologians and youth ministry experts and coaches. We get to introduce those youth ministers to tools that they can bring back home with them, to different theological frames that they can introduce into their ministries, and we like to connect youth ministers to each other so that their work doesn't feel quite so lonely when they return home. But as we were planning for this year, we had to stop and acknowledge that we at the IYM were a little uncertain about the future of youth ministry. In our more dramatic moments, and we have a few, we wondered, is there a future for youth ministry? We do think that there is, but we also know that the landscape of the church has changed dramatically in the past few years. As you likely know, numbers in mainline denominations have been declining for quite some time, and that decline has now been expedited by what I'll call the events of 2020, because this decline is coming from more than the pandemic effect. Young people aren't showing up to church in the same way, and as a result, youth ministers are under immense pressure to perform what seems like miracles to get young people to come back to church. The Institute for Youth Ministry needed to hear from the people that we serve. We aim to craft a future of youth ministry together with practitioners. We knew that our good ideas for training, such as our fully remote, asynchronous online certificate program, our online forum on youth ministry, things like that those things might not be actually helpful to people in the churches who are working with young people if we didn't start first with a posture of curiosity, seeking to learn more about what it's like to do youth ministry in a congregational setting. So, for this year's forum, we did something a little bit different. We opted for more of a guide on the side model and flipped the conference, meaning that we still had brilliant theologians like Patrick Reyes, who Shari's just mentioned, to come and speak to our leaders and to facilitate conversations, but we wanted the main gathering spaces to be workshops where youth ministers could talk more rather than hear more, where they could have a conversation facilitated by seasoned experts so that we could hear from them ultimately, what do you think the future of youth ministry is like? What do you need from people like us here at the Institute for Youth Ministry? Again, this event just happened, so we still have to synthesize a lot that we heard. Please sign up for our newsletter in this QR code. I'll mention it again, so don't feel like you have to do it right this second. But here are some of the major takeaways that I heard. 1, youth ministers need support. Support from each other, support from institutions like ours, and support from the local church, which in many cases means many of you. Youth ministers long for their work to be taken seriously. That for most, it is a vocation, as Shari was talking about. It's not just a launch pad into another position within a church context, but something that they feel called to. Sure, youth ministry sometimes might just look like a form of babysitting so that adults can attend their Sunday service, but great youth ministry takes the spiritual lives and questions of young people seriously, which creates deep roots for a lifetime of faith. 2, youth ministers are exhausted. They are often given the impossible task of making youth group like it was in the 90s, which was the heyday of youth ministry. We heard that youth ministers often felt as though they didn't have the freedom to get creative with their ministry, to try new forms of how they were caring for young people. that they had to stick within the programmatic molds that they had inherited from their predecessors, which meant that they felt sort of down in whatever vision that they felt God had given them for their ministry, which sort of wore away at their enthusiasm, sometimes got them into hot water within their congregations, again, adding to the exhaustion that they were facing. Youth ministers are burning out, whether from working multiple jobs to cover rent or from being frontline caregivers in the youth mental health crisis. The folks who feel called to do youth ministry are not sure how much longer they can keep it up. 3, youth ministers love teenagers, a group that is notoriously hard to love, which is to say, youth ministry is of immense value. Young people are crying out right now for the world to be a more just, whole, and beautiful place. These cries are an expression of hope as well as pain, which, whether young people know it or not, is a theological vision. I think that they are expressing and seeking the kingdom of God in their midst, looking for hope in a world that isn't quite as it should be. In most everywhere else in their lives, young people are met with cynicism and skepticism about their hopes for a better world. But people doing youth ministry are uniquely called to shepherd young people in a God-given vision of shalom. Robust youth ministry is for such a time as this. My name is Liz Moore, and I am the Assistant Director of the Institute for Youth Ministry, where we form Christian leaders for thoughtful, just, and creative ministry with young people. I'm here to invite you not just to a 45-minute workshop, but to consider what is God's invitation to you to care for the young people in your midst. And if it feels like God is doing something for you, maybe you should go to Shari's workshop and not mine. I'm just saying that. I'd rather you care for the young people than maybe listen to what I have to say for 45 minutes. But you, PTS alumni, are crucial to the future of youth ministry, both in the support of youth ministers in your churches and in the spiritual friendships that you can offer young people. What is the future of youth ministry? It is both a place that we are headed and one that is the same as it always has been, loving and caring for the lives of young people. And we need you and every Christian adult to do this work well. To learn more about the Institute for Youth Ministry, our events, our programs, our community, please scan this QR code. You may do so now. Or join me in Stewart 3 for a workshop on the spiritual lives of Gen Z. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Soojin Chung, and I'm the director of the Overseas Ministry Study Center at Princeton Theological Seminary, which just celebrated the 100th anniversary. And you might be wondering, what? It wasn't there when I was going to school. It's because O.M.S.C just recently moved from New Haven. It used to be right across from Yale Divinity School, and it was originally established in Ventnor, New Jersey. So it actually came back to its home, to New Jersey, and we recently celebrated her 100th anniversary. So before I talk about my center, we're going to do a little bit of a pop quiz. And don't you hate it when your teachers do this? But I'm going to ask you, does anybody know what was the world Christian population back in 1910? You don't have to give me a precise number, but approximately, what do you think is the approximate number? 90%? 90%? 50%, 40%, 20%. Okay, we're all over the place. How about just 2 years ago, 2022? 60%? 3? Did I hear 3? That's really sad. 30, okay. Anyone else? 1, 2, 10. Okay. So the answer to that question is on this graph, which may shock you because every single time I show my students, they're shocked. Since 1910, it says 2010, but 1910 to present day, 2024, Christians around the world have always been around 33 to 35%. And this is the most boring graph for religious demographers because it's virtually not changing, right? But what is not shown on this graph is who is included in this 35%. So who is included? So this graph is a little bit more interesting because it does show who is included. So it is not a secret that Christianity started in the global south, but we all know that it started to go to Europe. We have the late antiquities and the late medieval ages, Middle Ages, and then we go to the 1500s where it's peak in Europe, and then it goes slowly back to global south. So this is a story a lot of people don't know, that Christianity is actually shifting its gravity towards the global south, majority world, or Asia, Africa, Latin America. So I have more statistics. I think my colleague Afe used to say, I don't believe in statistics, but he uses it all the time. Back in 1910, there were 18% of people who were Christians and lived in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And that jumped to 41% in 1970. And just 4 years ago, 65% of Christians lived in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Oceania. And I can only imagine, I don't have the most recent statistics of 2024, which is going to be published soon. But we can only imagine, there's going to be more people living in Asia, or more Christians living in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And if you're a visual learner like me, 1910, it was a lot blue in North America and Europe. And although they're geographically south, Australia and New Zealand as a country are more culturally global north. So compare this map to this map. Do you see, especially in Africa, the difference? And how much less blue Europe and North America has become? So that is exactly why O.M.S.C exists. So 1922 was when O.M.S.C was established, and 1910 is arguably the height of Protestant mission at the 1910 Yale Edinburgh Conference, right? And this was a time when Margaret and Ida Jones established O.M.S.C at the height of Protestant mission. And it was mainly established as a center of houses of fellowship for missionaries on furlough, specifically Anglophone, Caucasian, North American missionaries, and they hosted many thousands of people there, and they were represented in 106 mission agencies, 97 different fields, and 443 overseas stations. However, the residents now shifted to these folks. So we see a lot of different demographics, right? We have Mang from Burma, Jones from Nigeria, Timok from Mexico, Linjing from China, Eric from Pakistan, Yutaka from Japan, and Sena from Ethiopia. So majority of our scholars and residents shifted from North American missionaries to global scholars from all over the world. And that is exactly why we exist, to amplify the voices of the global church, or the global south specifically, but the global church as a whole. And I'm going to show you a little bit of a short video that we recently created, because I think videos, or I think it's a picture. My English is not my first language, but I think pictures are worth 1,000 words, but I'm assuming videos are worth more than that. So let's see a short video that shows what we do at O.M.S.C.
O.M.S.C was founded in 1922 as the Houses of Fellowship by Margaret and Ida Doan. And since then, the residents have shifted from being North American missionaries to global partners and global scholars from all over the world, especially from Asia, Africa, and Latin America.
To come to Princeton Seminary for a year of what we'd like to say is rest and research and relationship, that they get a chance to get away from the context of their ministry and their teaching, and to really dig in deep into a question that they might have.
The program helped me to accomplish my research agenda in so many ways, as it creates the space for critical thinking and engage in so many various directions through the seminars we're having every month on different topics.
And not only the Princeton Theological Seminary, but also outside Princeton, there are lots of top scholars. O.M.S.C. invited them for us.
This kind of like a surrounding for me to make me merge into myself to do the translation. I mean, translation is not something that you can do every day after cooking. It's not that something you can just get down into your table and then start it to translate. Then you need to really have yourself merged into a poetic surrounding to prepare yourself, prepare your heart and soul for it. Yeah. So I think this is also what O.M.S.C, the co-campers, has given me overallly, to prepare myself to do academic work, the research in one way, but also to have a calming and healing heart.
It's been amazing working with people from across the globe. We have friends from Japan, from China, basically from everywhere. The sharing together, the communion has been awesome. It has really helped to widen my scope and horizon and understanding even my own research perspective.
So sometimes not only inside the O.M.S.C community, but also a larger community of scholars, and then we engage with the local ministries here at university, as well as congregations, then students, then faculty, and then our own O.M.S.C community. So in a whole way, this is like iron sharpening iron experience.
Okay, so let me see if I can. Okay. So one of the things that marks O.M.S.C is our ecumenical nature. So as you can see, we have many different representatives from many different nations, from many different theological backgrounds, and many theological differences and theological persuasions. So it is really important to center Jesus Christ as our center, but have many different opinions about many different things, and to really have that sense of unity even amongst diversity. And we really try to deprivilege, and I have to be a little bit careful because I was also educated in North America, right? But a lot of our Western theological discourses are very Eurocentric, and we try to deprivilege that discourse and to really incorporate our scholars from the global South. And in partnership with Johnna's office, we try to create a lot of equitable digital content and disseminate it oftentimes free of charge to the larger Princeton area as well as the larger public. So that's some of the things that we do. And Caitlin Barton, our International Scholars Coordinator, has brought some flyers as well as complimentary journal, International Bulletin of Mission Research. That is a journal that we publish from O.M.S.C at PTS, which is the highest circulating journal in the field in world Christianity and mission studies. So if you want a complimentary copy, please go to Caitlin, right there, and she's going to give you, I don't think she has enough for everyone, but a couple of copies for you to take home with you. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Johnna Herrick-Phelps, and I am the Associate Dean for Online and Digital Learning. And I have to tell you, I am thrilled to have the opportunity to share with you today some of the exciting advancements in online and digital education at Princeton Theological Seminary. As we navigate a rapidly changing educational landscape, Princeton Seminary is at the forefront, embracing innovative learning modalities that expand accessibility and flexibility for learners across the globe. Our goal is to create a learning community for life. And one of our cornerstone initiatives of our digital transformation is the introduction of the Master of Arts in Theology, Justice and Public Life. This hybrid degree program is designed for working professionals who are passionate about leading social change toward justice. The program combines online coursework with a week-long on-campus intensive each January during their program. And it's really about making theological education accessible for students regardless of their geographical location. The curriculum is deeply rooted in Princeton Seminary's commitment to integrating rigorous academic study with practical application. Students are currently in a variety of roles. We have a federal judge. We have a CEO of a large nonprofit, a person who works on Wall Street, and an attorney from a large university, just to name a few. They all engage with complex societal issues through a theological lens, preparing them to be prophetic voices and faithful leaders in various sectors. I'd like to take a moment and share with you a brief video about the program and also sharing some of the students with you.
For about 15 years, I've been considering doing a master's degree related to theology. But as someone who was already working in full-time Christian ministry, I couldn't imagine how I could make that work with my busy work schedule and with my family life.
Princeton Theological Seminary, you have a winner here. This is a program that's innovative, it's insightful, it's well designed for its delivery across the platform, for hybrid learning for working professionals.
I chose this program because those three concepts and ideas and areas of focus, theology, justice, and the public life, are really at the core of who I am, what I value, and what I would articulate as my calling in stewardship of my life.
It wasn't until I found out about this program that I felt God really calling me to start a new chapter in serving the community with my gifts and with my passions that God has instilled in me.
What's been most rewarding, just to engage with a cohort of really fascinating backgrounds, what they bring to sharing and reading of biblical texts, and how we all interact across the different discussion boards. So thank you for that.
I also really appreciate that this program being remote enables me and my fellow students and classmates to remain rooted in our own communities and neighborhoods. The work of justice requires proximity, and so the opportunity to learn and be able to apply that in our daily lives without uprooting, temporarily moving states to a brand new community and then returning is something that we're really thankful for.
I really believe that we can all be lifelong learners, and I'm excited to think about how much more there is to come. I've really enjoyed the instruction of our professors. I loved the interactions with my cohort. I just give thanks to God for meeting this amazing group of people.
Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this program. I can't wait to discover more about myself, more about God, and more about the work that we can do and the difference that we can make. And I'm looking forward to learning all of that in this program.
As you can see from the video, a key aspect of our digital strategy is fostering a sense of community among our online learners. And through our innovative platforms and our learning management system, students can connect, they can collaborate, and share resources with peers and faculty, creating a vibrant learning community that transcends physical boundaries. So in addition to our degree programs, we are significantly expanding our catalog of non-degree programs. And these offerings are stackable and designed to provide flexible learning pathways. They include certificate programs, workshops, and modules, short modules, that can be tailored to meet the specific needs and interests of our learners. And these programs are being developed in collaboration with key partners, such as the Center for Asian American Christianity. They're in the process of creating a stackable certificate. And you heard from Soojin on the Overseas Ministries Study Center. They're developing some on-demand self-paced programs and a new certificate. We're also working with key initiatives and institutes from continuing education, as you heard from Shari with Polaris. It's very exciting. I encourage you to check it out with the online. It just came up. And also, of course, last but not least, the Institute for Youth Ministry is doing a number of projects, including updating their flagship certificate in youth ministry, as well as other offerings such as mental health and neurodiversity. Each offering is crafted to foster an inclusive and engaging learning environment that creates and supports a learning community for life. These are just a few examples of the projects that are in progress, and I invite you to sign up for our mailing list so that you can stay abreast of all the new offerings that are going to be coming up in the next few months, and I'll have a handy-dandy handout for you that I'll set here. But you can also find us on our website at online.ptsem.edu, and I'll put in a plug for our new website. On the nav bar, you'll see online and professional studies. So in conclusion, as we look to the future, Princeton Theological Seminary remains dedicated to providing an education that is not only academically excellent, but expands our reach to communities and networks that might not otherwise have the opportunity to be part of the Princeton Theological Seminary community. Our new online and digital learning initiatives are just the beginning of this exciting journey. And I invite you to join us as we continue to innovate and lead in the field of theological education, empowering the next generation of leaders to make a meaningful impact in the world. I invite you, please don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions, or if you'd like to learn more about the Office of Online and Digital Learning. I always enjoy talking about the great work that's happening here at the seminary. And I'll end by saying thank you for your continued support and commitment to the seminary. Together, we are shaping the future of theological education. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. You have a mini break, and at 10:45, the workshops will begin downstairs. And when those are done, we will gather once more in the chapel for our closing worship service, which begins at 11:45. And at that conclusion, we have our lunch, which has obviously moved from the quad in the rain to inside the Mackay Campus Center. So when you enter the front doors of the campus center, you'll go to the left into the main lounge, which is where the buffet will be, and then you can find your way into the main dining hall and find a seat. And some students and faculty and staff will be joining us for lunch as well. So thank you, and off to your workshops. Thanks.